We want to make sure and thank our sponsors for this season on Agentic AI. Infor. Most AI can't tell the difference between a yield loss and a rounding error. Infor leads with AI built from the ground up for the food industry, from demand forecasting to shelf life to catch weights. That's precision. See how at infor.com.
Welcome back to Fresh Takes on Tech. I'm Vonnie Estes with the International Fresh Produce Association. Today I'm joined by Elliott Grant. Elliott has spent his career at the intersection of technology, agriculture, food, data, everything about jet engines, all sorts of things we don't even know. He has led ag tech companies, worked deeply in food decision making, and is now thinking and writing about one of the most important shifts happening in AI. The move from AI as a tool that gives us information to AI as an agent that can make decisions, take action, and negotiate with other agents. Elliott also has a book coming out, which we will hear more about, with a chapter on agentic AI. So this is a great time to step back and ask what this could mean for food and agriculture, and specifically for fresh produce. Welcome, Elliott. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Vonnie. It's great to chat to you again.
Why don't you just take a minute? We were talking about this before we started, and just update people on what you're doing and like where you are right now in that lab, just so people know what you're up to.
So I literally right now I'm in Cambridge in the UK, so British Cambridge, the Whittle Laboratory, which is the world leading jet engine lab, which is a bit different to my experience in the produce business, but in many ways it was my first love. I did engineering here at Cambridge. I consulted with aerospace companies. I was even in the RAF as a cadet.
Wow.
So who knew that? I used to fly. So coming back to Cambridge, I'm now working in jet engines again. But I still remain very passionate about fresh produce, of course.
Well, and we appreciate that you continue to straddle those worlds, because as we were talking about, some of the problems are the same, and we're just happy to have you stay in the industry and keep us thinking about these things. So let's jump right into agentic AI. So to start off, people are talking about it everywhere, but I'm not sure everyone knows what it is or if they even mean the same thing when they say it. So when you talk about it, what do you mean, and what makes it different from the AI tools like ChatGPT, or how do I plan my travel? How's it different than what people are already experiencing?
Sure, thank you. And they are different, and I would say most people have not experienced agentic AI yet. What are we in? End of June 2026. So this may not age well, this comment. Most people have not used agentic AI. So a chatbot, like a GPT or a Gemini, creates content based on a prompt. You ask it a question, it comes back. Whereas an agentic AI will independently set goals, come up with a plan, and then execute some tasks with little or no human intervention. So the timescales are different. A chatbot response is instantaneous. An agent could go off and work for minutes, hours, or even days and do things and then come back with an answer. So there's a time span difference. The second is how much thinking it does. So a chatbot responds almost instantly. It's like a top-of-the-mind answer, whereas an agent will go off and may spin up tools, spin up other agents, go on the internet and look at things. So they are quite different. Maybe the best way to illustrate this for this audience is with a sort of an analogy in agriculture, not an analogy, an example in ag. It doesn't happen yet. But I think many of us would be used to the idea that you could pull out your camera, scan a diseased leaf, and an AI will be able to classify that disease. That's a very good example of what AI or generative AI can do today. It could classify the disease, might even be able to tell you sort of from a book what you should do about it. Now compare that to what an agentic AI should be able to do. Starting with the same picture, it should reason about the cause. It might look up the weather where you're at and say, oh, well, it's this, this much humidity. And then it might look up herbicide information to say, well, let's look at the safety sheets. Can I spray? Then it places an order with a vendor after negotiating prices, orders the herbicide, and then books the team to do the spraying. And then even a week after it's been sprayed, go back and check whether or not the spray had the effect you wanted. And if it has or has not, it updates its own model. So you can see how radically different an agentic approach is to what we're using today.
How do you get there? And like you said, it's not instantaneous because it goes out as your agent and does all these things. And so who owns that interface? How does that interface get set up? What's the working model and the business model behind using something like that?
All still up in the air. So it's a very much an emergent space. You may have heard of OpenClaw. So this is the big thing a few weeks ago. What your people are doing is effectively downloading a piece of software, an agent. It resides on their own hardware, and they're often buying Mac Minis to do this work. And you can think of the agent sort of living in that computer, accessing the internet, and you actually give it permissions. You say, here's my, this would be very dangerous, I don't recommend this, here's my login to my email, here's my credit card, right? Go off and do something. And this is where people get into trouble. It goes off and does things that you didn't expect it to do. But in theory, the agent is working on your behalf, right? It has agency for you. So your question about business model is really interesting. Right now, these things are open source. And so who's making money on an agent? It's a very different model to a sort of an ad-driven question and answer model.
Yeah, and or even like, I know some of the large retailers, people selling crop protection products to farmers, like are starting to think about using some of these tools and how it allows them to sell the product. In the example that you gave, so I'm just trying to think how I remember someone demonstrated something that wasn't agentic, but it was just helping them with information. But okay, we think that fire blight's going to be in this area. So it will go and say, okay, these are the 10 people you've sold, that fungicide to in the past. We'll write an email for them, and then you can send it to these people with this kind of pricing. Yeah. So,
and that's generative. I would say what you just described.
Yeah, that's generative. Yeah. So so the difference would be if there was a person, a crop protection retailer, and that stuff just happened without them being involved in it, or you think it?
Let's extend your example. So again, we'll take the agent now belongs to the retailer in this example you're giving me. Yeah. So that agent not only sends an email, when the grower who received the email responds, the agent reads the email and then will reason about okay, well, what's the response? Maybe that the grower emailed back and said, I'm not interested this year because you're too expensive. The agent, again, independently will come back and say, well, we've got a special deal on, or if you buy this volume, I'll do you a special discount, because it's been given authority by the retailer to negotiate within some thresholds. So it's effectively behaving as a good salesperson would. So again, we can see the difference between a sort of a chatbot, which does one thing one time, and an agent which has agency, hence the name. So, we're heading here is a very interesting direction. You've got a human on one side of this negotiation, and you have an AI agent on the other. And this poses some very interesting questions about how this will play out in terms of who's going to be a better negotiator. I would argue that chances are the AI is going to be a better negotiator than I am. Yeah. And so I think it sort of invariably will start the sort of escalation where if you're negotiating with an AI agent, you want to have an AI agent as well.
That's really interesting. So how do you see this playing out and using, staying in kind of food and agriculture? How do you think it's going to move forward? Because I can kind of imagine in that, maybe that's 2 years. I don't know. Maybe it's 5. I don't know. Maybe it's 6 months. We don't know. Everything's moving so fast. But how do you kind of see it start getting traction and start playing out in our industry?
It's a very interesting question about AI. People are trying all kinds of things. Some of them are very ill-advised, like giving it your credit card, for example. So I think the first places we'll see agentic AI show up is where there are repeatable, routine, but verifiable decisions. And verifiable is very important, which means you will let the agent loose. You want to be able to know what's a good answer and what's a bad answer. So in other words, it's not a totally open-ended task. There's an outcome you want. I want to complete a sale. I want it to happen within this price range. I want it to happen within this time. Versus, let's say, an agent you let off and say, go do breeding for me, right? Or go do something really ambiguous and open-ended. I just don't think that's a good use case. I'm not saying it will never happen, but I wouldn't start there. So I think the set of cases where you'd have an agent is verifiable tasks, routine tasks, ideally not existential for the company. Like if the agent screws it up, if the agent messes it up, it's not the end of the world. Now, and over time, what we'll see, I think, is the agents get more capable and take on more.
And people start to trust them more, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually turn out to be doing a very good job. Then I think we will see more of them. So, I mean, we can probably think of several examples of that, but they would be mundane, sort of quotidian tasks like send out a marketing email, follow up on that marketing email, chase up invoices, follow up on recruiting things. I thought of one the other day, actually, when I was talking to a grower who was thinking about prices in the market. Also, what if you have an agent that logs onto every retailer's website every single day, looks up your commodity, and checks the price for that geography? You'd never have a human do that. It just wouldn't be worth it. But you could absolutely task an agent with a job like that.
So when you think about who these agents work for, and it sounds like we should all have our own, so that we're negotiating. So is it, at what point you get whoever's doing some buying and selling like owns inventory, and then whoever needs the inventory, the person who needs the inventory has their own agent, and the person buying and selling has their own agent, and this all just happens and things just show up? Is that
in an ideal world? Wouldn't that be great, right? Where in theory, you end up with a perfect optimum where the person who has inventory to sell finds the customer who wants to buy it at that exact price, and you transact in a perfect way. Now, it isn't going to be perfect, but arguably it's much better than human to human, which is very slow and inefficient. So there's one future which we all say, this is wonderful, right? My purchases are happening at a much fairer price. The seller is happy with the price, so the price clearance is good. The information available is far greater. The price discovery is amazing if you do this. So I think there's lots of real interesting outcomes, but you raised the word earlier, which is who are they negotiating on behalf of, right? Who do they work for? When you use Google or any of these other free products today, you're getting a free product because you're trading. You're not paying for Google, right? You're not paying for it directly. You're trading your eyeballs for a free product. And I did some back of the envelope math. It's something like guess how much you're worth to Google as an American?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's about $1,500 a year right now. So now we all are okay with that trade-off. Like, we're okay seeing ads to get a really, really good search engine and all the other goodies that we get from Google. But we also recognize that they are controlling what we see. If you want to have an agent negotiating on your behalf, you probably want to be paying for it directly rather than being subsidized by ads.
Yeah.
As it stands to reason that you wouldn't be sure you're getting the best deal if someone else is paying for your agent.
Well, we used to say, like with Facebook, if you're not paying for a product, you are the product.
You are the product. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this goes back to your earlier question about the business model. The answer is I don't know, right? And the reason I brought up that Google example is, would I be willing to pay $1,400 a year for ads or for ad-free search? No, I probably wouldn't. So how much am I willing to pay for an agent? I don't know yet.
That is really fascinating. When we think about produce, and we've talked so much about just the whole supply chain and the transparency of data and the decisions the types of things you worked on at Mineral, the decisions of like, when do you plant? What do you plant? When are you going to harvest? When is it going to get through the supply chain? And when is it going to get on the shelf, at a major retailer like Walmart? So there's so many decision points along the way, and it's getting a little more efficient, but it's still so inefficient because there's so many decision points and so many different steps. And you've got someone, like the big retailers that have a lot of power and a lot of money. Do you think they will end up like forcing, the adoption of their technology or their agent or their way of doing things down to the grower? Or how is this going to affect the whole supply chain?
Obviously, hard to know.
But we're just speculating.
Yeah, it's a little speculate. I'm optimistic, and here's why. Today, unless you're a really big supplier, you're outcompeted, outpunched by the major retailers, and they can use their scale to extract concessions on price and so on. Now that may still be true going forward, but if they introduce an AI agent, then you also, I think, you as a supplier can introduce an AI agent. I actually think it's sort of leveling up for the supplier, especially the smaller supplier who wouldn't necessarily have access to
Right.
a top class, first class salesperson. But now maybe they can. And I'll give you an example of why I think this is true. Literally a week ago here in the UK, I think it was the first in the world, an AI lawyer won a case in court against a human lawyer. Now, in the UK, you still had to have a human show up and be your barrister in court. But that barrister was literally just sort of serving on behalf of the AI agent. So it was a small case. I mean, it was maybe $10,000 or so. But it was a first. Not only that a case was heard that was purely driven by AI from one side, but it actually won the case.
And so did they set it up that way? It's like, we're going to do this as a test case?
No, I think it was a regular court case. The plaintiff decided to use an AI lawyer because they couldn't afford a full-blown, barrister or attorney. So they spent like $400 on the AI tool, and they got represented, and they won. So this is why I argue about the leveling up. Like, would that person, and it was against a big company, would that person have ever been able to bring that suit if it was human to big company? Probably not. But in the case of an AI agent, they can.
Do you think in that type of example, you're getting kind of David and Goliath in a positive way, where you've got a small guy being able to go against the big guys, but there's also, these big companies could be more evil, or they could, how does it go the other direction?
Let me just on the record here, Vonnie, big companies are not evil. They just have more resources.
Yeah.
I just think it will level up, right? It will limit the information asymmetry and the knowledge asymmetry that currently exists. They may still have slightly better AI agents than you or I, but I think the delta will close.
Okay. So you think it's going to give people who are not the large companies with more resources, it's going to give them a little more power.
I think so.
In the whole thing. Wow.
And I'm an optimist, so maybe that's...
Yeah, I am too. And I shouldn't say companies are evil. They're certainly perceived to be evil. They have to take care of stakeholders.
They've got to look after the
things. Exactly.
While we're on this, again, I maybe want to get us off the evil track. But it raises, in my mind, another interesting problem, which is about whose interests are they working on behalf of, and how would we know what happened in that negotiation? Because today, if you and I have a negotiation, well, we have our own memory of it, and maybe there's some written records and back and forth emails. In an AI to AI or agent to agent, it's called A to A negotiation, if not carefully controlled, that will happen between the agents, potentially not even in English. And there was some research a while ago that proved this, that if you let agents basically go talk to each other, they realize how inefficient English is. Or any language, any human language, not English particularly.
Wow.
We have a lot of ums and ahs and, and what they realized, they discovered these agents started to make a more perfect language for communicating with each other. It was complete gobbledygook to us. There's a wonderful...
It's like a science fiction movie. That's amazing.
And it makes sense, right? Because what you're asking the agents to do is like, go off and solve this problem for me. You don't tell them what language to do it in. And these agents are like, well, I'm going to save a lot of time by not speaking in English. I'm going to speak in this sort of machine-y code. Of course, the problem for us when we go back and say, well, how did you come up with that answer? We look at the transcript and we're like, what the heck is this? So because people anticipated this, I think Google introduced a tool called A to A, agent to agent. And it's a way of creating traceability and verifiability for exactly these interactions. Because I think left to their own devices, these agents will go and be extremely efficient and completely unintelligible to us. I'll give you another example. Again, this is very just speculative. Why wouldn't they choose to collude? They're like, oh, this negotiation is too complicated. I'll do this for you and you do something for me later. How would we know if there's no transparency? So as we enter this agent world, transparency will become incredibly important to make sure they are following the rules that would apply to you and me negotiating. Like, you're not allowed to discriminate against me. There are rules for that kind of thing, and vice versa. But how would we know an agent's following the rules?
So how would we?
We don't know. We don't care. Well, that one reason is to have traceability, and the other is to basically hold these agents accountable, or at least their owners accountable, in the same way we would hold a human accountable.
Thinking about consumers, you've done a lot of work downstream with consumers, with Shopwell and some of the other things that you've worked on. So how can you see this, in the world of produce and health and nutrition? How do you see the possibility of using agentic AI for consumers?
This is another area, again, maybe I just come across as wildly techno-optimistic, but this is another area where I'm very optimistic. Having worked with the PMA and the IFPA for years, working very hard to explain to consumers why produce is a healthy choice, and yet we see the answer in purchases as pretty much flat. Right? It's just been incredibly difficult to get consumers to change behavior.
Yeah.
And we've tried all kinds of things. The entry of an agent into that equation is very interesting. Let's assume for a moment that consumer 5 years from now is outsourcing some amount of her purchasing to her agent. Like, go decide what's in my shopping basket for next week. Again, it's agentic, remember. This isn't a prompt and a response. This is looking at price, health goals, seasonality, flavor, my personal preferences, and it will assemble a basket of goods for me next week, and it maybe purchase them and have them delivered. So imagine that world exists for some percentage of the population. That agent is now more perfectly representing what I actually want versus what I do in the store. The agent is not influenced by shelf placement, by bright colored packaging, by on-health claims of, on-pack claims of health from the center store. It has a more perfect idea of, you want to eat healthily, you want your phytochemicals, you want more fiber, blah, blah, blah. It should, in theory, be buying you 5 a day. Again, if it just shows up with broccoli the whole time, I'd probably fire the agent. But
yeah,
but
you would put in preferences of like how much diversity you would put that in. Yeah,
and maybe it says, hey, broccoli is really well priced today, and I bought double, right? And here's a recipe. Here's a recipe, and it goes very well with these lardons, by the way. So I think there's a world in which that what shoppers tell surveyors is, I want to eat more healthily, I want to eat sustainably, I want to eat locally, but it's very difficult to execute that in the store. But if I tell my agent those are my priorities, it can go off and execute them. So this is why I'm optimistic. Imagine millions, tens of millions of decisions now being aggregated for things like more produce, more sustainable, more fiber, more flavor. I think that would only be good for the produce industry, with one giant asterisk at the end, which is if the agents have good information about the benefits of produce, which they should have. If they
they should have.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes us think about, as an organization that tries to get more and more information out about nutrition, it's like, it can only go after information that's out there. So
this is an experiment I've done, actually, because I was curious about, before telling you this anecdote, I was like, I wonder what agents know today about fresh produce. And so, of course, we're coming off the back of the Dirty Dozen news coming up every summer, as it does. And so I went to an agent, and I said, or actually it was a chatbot, and I said, are strawberries a good choice? Because I've heard these terrible things.
Oh, yeah.
And so I asked it a very naive question. I want to eat healthily, but I'm very worried about, pesticide residues. And it came back and it said, if you're worried, just wash the produce. It's a good idea to wash your produce, but on balance, the health benefits of strawberries vastly outweigh any of the negative consequences. So it was a very reasonable, recommendation. And I don't know where it got. Actually, I asked, where did you get your information? I want to say it came from the IFPA. So I'm not just saying that. It emphasizes the point, right? You want to be a trusted source of data.
Yeah.
Not Reddit.
Yeah, exactly. And you wonder, there's so much out there. If you think about the volume of information, there's probably more information out there by babes of different kinds that are saying negative things. And so how an agent can go in and say, okay, there's 3 times more information or, talk about the bad stuff than there's about the good stuff. How do I choose? Well, and is it based on science?
Well, exactly. Let's hope our agents are not weighing, data by volume.
Yeah.
And so again, unless you've got a really infantile agent, it should say, well, you know what? I'm going to go and read some academic papers about this. I'm going to go and, study this. in a world where we have agents, there's no reason it can't go off and spend like PhD level research, read the papers, come up with its conclusions, and come back to you. It shouldn't be saying, well, there's 10 articles yesterday about pesticides and only one about nutrition. It must be bad for pesticides. The agent in this world should be more balanced. Whereas a consumer might be influenced by the barrage of information they're seeing about pesticides.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. But how does it know that scientific data is better than mom data,
or some influencer who's got a million followers. I mean, this is the ultimate question of who's behind your agent. In the same way that today, if you use a chatbot, the chatbot is making some value judgments that are sort of hidden from you. If you use Grok, you're going to get a different answer to a question than if you ask Gemini or Claude or OpenAI. There's no objective reality. I mean, unless you ask it like, does gravity exist or is the Earth flat? I hope they would all come back with similar answers. But if you ask it a nuanced question, which is maybe political or country to country, there might be sensitivities, they will come back with answers that are influenced by their training data and their what's called their fine tuning or their post-training. The same will be true of the agent helping you go shopping. So I would say if Google offers me an agent for shopping, I'm going to trust it in the same way that I trust Google search. If if Pravda offer me an agent, or the Chinese government offer me an agent to do my shopping, I might have some questions about, how biased is it and what it's influencing me.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. One of the things, as you know, I live in the Bay Area, and one of the things I ask everybody I run into is where they grocery shop, because it's such a hot button in the Bay Area. And it tells you volumes, it just tells you volumes about people, about how they answer it. And I was recently in another country asking other people from other countries, and they just looked at me like, well, I go to the store that's closest. And it was really fast. I said, well, they're all close to me, So I just find it fascinating it's just like, what's your personal bias and what do you want and what's important? And if you just say, okay, it's nutrition and I want to get the best food for nutrition, and then where does it pull from? It's a fascinating question.
Well, and ideally, again, we're talking conceptuals here. The agent will learn your preferences.
Yeah.
I don't really want to try to buy someone else's preferences. I hope it would say, okay, well, this is your age, gender, health goals, your family needs, and it will shape its recommendations at a high level based on what you need. But again, the point I'm making is there will be hidden biases in all of these models.
Yeah, I think that's true. So talking a little bit, we touched a little bit on adoption, but just the whole idea of, crossing the chasm and how is this going to happen and where is it going to hit first? And I know it's asking for crystal ball thinking, but I know you're thinking about these things.
I'm thinking about them. Where would it happen first? I said earlier that I thought that sort of a negotiation between a buyer and a seller was a logical place to have an agent. I actually think that's where we'll see it first. I think if you're a grower shipper and one of your salespeople is emailing with a retailer, at some point there's going to be that person on the other end will be an agent, an agentic AI. And it may not be obvious that person is not human, it's an agentic AI. That, I think, is the trigger that starts the adoption of agents, right? So one party uses an agent, it will drive the other party to want to use an agent to sort of level up the playing field. And those examples of negotiating a contract, renewing an invoice, chasing down a payment is an obvious place for agents to start coming in. So I think it will happen. It makes sense. It may already be happening. I'll give you another example. And this was a few years ago, actually. I was using Google and I went to find a hairdresser where I lived. And there it was on Google Maps. I was about to click on the phone number and it popped up a box and said, would you like me to make a reservation for you? I was like, sure. Looked at my calendar. Or he said, well, what day? I said, anytime this week. Looked at my calendar, found a slot. It called the hairdresser. It negotiated, to the extent that's a negotiation, a time slot for me, and it booked it and it put it in my calendar. Then I showed up at the hairdresser and I said, oh, do you remember talking to me about this appointment? He's like, oh yeah, you called me 2 days ago. he had no idea he was talking to an agent.
So it was actually they use voice. It was a person. It
Not
sounded
only
like
did
a
it use
person.
voice, it would have incorporated the ums and the ahs and the pauses. And, it's like, hey, can I come in at 10? No, it's not available. Oh, how about 11?
Wow.
It was, and my point of the story is that the person on the other end of the phone had no idea he was talking to an agent.
Yeah. Wow, that's
And
interesting.
that was a couple of years ago.
Getting back to produce and IFPA and our membership, if someone's listening to this and feeling their head exploding as much as I am, where do they start? What should people do? What questions should they ask about their business? And
I probably always come back to the same advice, which is whether it's agentic AI or generative AI or basic machine learning, data is the lifeblood of these systems. And good quality data that represents your business becomes very precious. So focusing on what data really should I be collecting from the company, protecting it, cleaning it, that's still true, and it'll become more and more true. So that's one answer. The second is none of us are going to make agents, right? Agents will become offered to us as a service. And I'm not sure where they're going to come from yet.
yeah,
Whether, it could come from your ERP provider. It could come from a Google. It could come from an Anthropic. I don't know yet. And so I think we're all on this learning journey of agents start showing up and you have to decide, where do I want to use them? And again, I go back to my point from the beginning of this pod is I wouldn't use them on something highly risky, highly open-ended, unverified.
with your credit card, yeah.
Definitely don't give me a credit card on day one. We just let's crawl, walk, run. Like, let's use them on things where we just can get to know them a little bit.
That's great. Well, let's finish up giving a plug for your book. When is it coming out? What's it called? And what do we expect to find in it?
Oh, well, I can't give away all the good stuff, although I may have spoken about one of the chapters at length just now. It's called, thank you for offering me to plug it. It's called Eating Tomorrow, and the subtext is AI and the Future of Food. And it's a retrospective of the last 150 years of innovation in the food system, and what are the lessons we can learn from that, and how will those apply to what AI is going to do to the food system, both very positive and what are the potential unintended consequences. So it hopefully will come out at the end of this year or early next year. It's published by Cambridge University Press. They tell me it will be available in America. So I'll let you know when it comes out.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and always a great time well spent talking to you and learning from you. And I look forward to seeing you at the Global Show in Orlando, if not before.
See you in Florida.